Demon Days, the second album from the fictional alt-rock band and creative project from both Blur frontman Damon Albarn and co-creator of the Tank Girl comic series Jamie Hewitt, Gorillaz, is widely considered to be one of the best albums of the 2000s. Created after a 4-year hiatus following their debut self-titled record, the album turned out to be one of their most successful projects yet, and from it produced some of the band's most iconic songs. The album's lead single, Feel Good Inc., is the song most people would think of when reminded of the group, and for good reason. But my mind is more drawn to the record's second single, Dare. Maybe it's because I wasn't overexposed to the song like I was to Feel Good Inc., or because it's one of the more simple and less melancholy tracks on the album, but Dare quickly became one of my favorite songs from the record, despite my opinion on the album as a whole being positive but underwhelming compared to the hype surrounding it. Dare was a pretty big song, going platinum and becoming the band's only #1 hit in the UK, but it was completely dwarfed compared to the worldwide success of the lead single. So it isn't an unknown song by any means, but I feel it often gets underappreciated. One interesting aspect to this overshadowing is the lack of solid documentation on the track's production. You can find plenty of facts and articles on the making of Feel Good Inc. and a lot of their other songs, but Dare has surprisingly little centralized information on how the track came to be, despite how big of a hit it was. But what has been reported from the song's creation is a long-standing rumor surrounding one of its guest vocalists, Shaun Ryder, and his inadvertent influence on the lyrics. As you may have heard, the song was originally meant to be titled It's There, but Shaun Ryder had such a heavy Manchester accent that he wasn't able to pronounce the word there, so the band had to change the title to Dare. If you look for anything about the song's production, that's likely the most prominent thing you'll hear. And since the song has been given a more comedic reputation after a few, to put it lightly, infamous live performances involving Ryder, it leads more credence to the story, given most people already see him related to the song in an amusingly incompetent way. Although, given how little there is public about the creation of the song, you'd think the source for the story would be readily available. But upon attempting to piece together this song's creation, which involved checking where this anecdote came from and hearing more recent accounts of the story from the people involved, I started to have my doubts about this aspect of the narrative actually happening in the popularly believed way. So today, I want to look into where this rumor came from, and if the story is as unquestionably true as most Gorillaz fans believe. Let's start off with what's undoubtedly where many outlets initially heard the story. The only thing mentioned about Dare's creation on its Wikipedia page is a short segment about this rumor. It was added to the page in August of 2006, making it the earliest reference to it on the site, and it's never been given a link to a source in all of this time, but it does say that the anecdote was actually told on national television. Allegedly, at the 2006 Brit Awards in February, presenter Chris Evans talks about the song's name change, most likely to poke fun at Shaun Ryder. This is the version of the story you'll most likely find if you look for any information about Dare, and looking at what happened at the Brits that year, it would make some sense for this to be mentioned. Shaun Ryder wasn't there, but Gorillaz would perform their song Dirty Harry at the event, and were nominated, though didn't win, Best British Group and Best British Album for Demon Days. So if this story was told on stage at one of the biggest televised award shows in Britain, then that would at least be a definitive reason for the story being as widespread as it is. Fortunately, someone happened to upload a recording of the entire 2006 Brit Awards to YouTube, so it's really easy to check this for ourselves. But after watching the whole show in full, I found that no one ever tells this story, or even talks about the band except for the host saying a few platitudes to introduce their performance and nomination for Best British Album. Even though the song they chose to showcase the band when listing off nominees was Dare both times, the song was never acknowledged by any of the show's presenters. Now, to be fair, on the talk page of the song's Wikipedia entry, the user who added the bit about the story does say they wrote it from memory, and this would have been a few months after the event, so it makes sense that they could have mixed up some details. But regardless, this bit on the Wikipedia page clearly isn't the source for the rumor, despite it definitely being where most people got their information from. Now the only question from this is where this user heard the story to get it confused in the first place. The earliest reference to the story I could find online was allegedly from a World Entertainment News piece quoting lead singer of Stone Roses Ian Brown in December of 2005, though the actual article isn't archived anywhere. Brown says he heard the story from the recording engineer for Gorillaz' first 2 albums, Jason Cox, but the article doesn't state where or when Brown actually said this. It might have been said at a different award ceremony, which would explain how the Wikipedia user got their information mixed up, but that's just speculation without any real basis. And there really is no trace of this rumor before the Wikipedia edit besides this one repost of an article. So it's not verifiable per se, but it's the earliest instance of the rumor I could track down, though but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the story's origin. But regardless of who told the story first, we should probably establish what really happened during the song's production to see if any of it lines up with the details of the rumor. And the best way to get that information would be to find what's been confirmably revealed by the band themselves. The most direct source from back when the album was released was an in-character interview with the band's guitarist Noodle, who in the Gorillaz universe was the person who created the song. The only thing directly said about the song's production is the story behind the build-up to the chorus.
He was stuck in the vocal booth with his headphones on, but he couldn't hear us. So he shouted over to us, "Hey, turn up the headphones, would ya?" So we're turning them up and he's going, "Yes, it's coming up a bit, it's coming up, it's coming up, it's coming up, it's there!" It sounded so good that we decided to use that bit for the chorus.
The story is also mentioned in the band's autobiography, Rise of the Ogre. It would be easy to write this off as a funny story the creators made up, since it's being told to us in-universe, but this story has actually been corroborated by Shaun Ryder himself on a few occasions, albeit in a way you can tell he is tired of being asked about it.
My story is, right, Eamon gets up a beat, and he gets, you know, the tune going, and I go in, and I'm trying to get the cans to get in my ears, and I'm going, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up, and then I go, it's there. And that's my story.
He also said in a 2015 NME interview that his other line in the song, Never Did No Harm, was also improvised by him. If this is true, then that would mean the song was not originally called It's There, since that part of the chorus was improvised by Ryder in the studio. Although one thing of note is that in that same interview, he also claims that him saying dare instead of there was actually intentional, from him trying to say it like someone would in texting lingo, which besides the fact that no one's ever texted the word there like that, him never mentioning this aspect of the story again makes this detail kinda suspect. But anyways, to add more to this narrative, the song wasn't even originally meant to have Shaun Ryder at all, since a demo of the song titled People, featuring only Damon Albarn's vocals, was featured on the Demon Days B-Sides record. Like I said, there's not much information on how this demo became Dare, but here's what I was able to piece together. At some point during the production of the song, Albarn decided to rework People using outside help. So he worked with the album's main producer, Danger Mouse, to revamp the musical ideas of the instrumental, and brought on some guest singers to redo the lyrics and give the singing on the album more variety. One of these singers was a musical newcomer named Rosie Wilson, under the stage name Roses Gabor, who was discovered by Albarn while working at a bank in London, and was asked to fill in for the singing voice of Noodle after both her singers from the debut album couldn't reprise their role. Her involvement isn't relevant for our purposes, but I figured she deserved some recognition since she hadn't been mentioned yet. And the other guest star chosen would be Shaun Ryder. Albarn has said that he brought on Ryder because he admired the influence he had on the early 90s dance rock scene in Manchester with his band Happy Monday, a movement that would eventually inspire both Blur and Gorillaz, and from establishing a connection with him after Ryder stood on the side of Blur during their power feud with fellow British rock band Oasis. When Ryder went into the studio to record, Albarn just told him to freestyle and see what sounded good to him, but not before Shaun accidentally immortalized himself in the band's lore by telling them to turn up the volume in his headphones. And eventually, the handful of lines that came from that session were turned into the finished version of Deo we see on Demon Days. Although the information on the track's creation is once again sparse, after all that, we should now be informed on the history of Deo enough to make a better theory on where or why this rumor was created. There most likely is some nuggets of truth to this story that's been telephone gamed by the people telling it and overblown by its spread online due to Shaun Ryder's modern reputation within the Gorillaz fanbase. For those unaware, the early live performances for Dare during the initial promotional tour for Demon Days had Ryder either incredibly intoxicated or being purposefully outrageous and offbeat, and this characterization of him as a brazen personality let people be predisposed to believing a story about the Gorillaz team needing to work around him in order to produce the track, instead of the more reasonable explanation of the production being a normal group effort. In all likelihood, they did make the title Dare to fit better with how Ryder pronounced it and the take they used for the song, and to be fair, the wording on the story as it was being told left a lot of room for misinterpretation. But the idea that him being belligerent got in the way of the band's original intentions just isn't the case given what we've been told. And also, just to be clear, Shaun Ryder says there correctly in the song. so even without any research, we'd know that him not being able to pronounce the word just isn't true. But nonetheless, other musicians had been told this story and relayed that to news outlets. And a Wikipedia user added it to the site, most likely crossing that story with an awards event Gorillaz recently partook in, which sounded reliable enough to most people who read it, and the story spread like wildfire from there. A handful of outlets have attempted to report on Ryder's statements and give a more correct version of events, but let's be honest, the rumor is more entertaining to learn about than what probably actually happened, so these corrections aren't gonna get as much attention. But although there realistically haven't been any consequences for this rumor being spread or corrected, it gave us a good excuse to dive into an interesting aspect of one of the best albums of the 2000s. And at the end of the day, it's always important to vet information and seek the truth, even if that truth is unfortunately a lot less funny. Was this an important piece of information that needed to be corrected? No. But it is interesting to find out how misinformation like this can be spread and accepted by so many people, even if it is something as inconsequential as this. And especially something this inconsequential related to a musical artist with a massive dedicated following like Gorillaz. There unfortunately isn't enough information to find out what happened definitively, but we at least know enough to understand what's true and what's been misinterpreted. This isn't really a dangerous piece of misinformation, since unless you count Shaun Ryder getting annoyed in interviews a couple of times, nothing's really getting hurt by this factoid getting spread. And me correcting the record might even have less of an impact, since the most this video is going to do is add a couple actually replies whenever someone brings up the rumor. But no matter if it's a lighthearted, funny fact about one of your favorite songs that happens to have a dubious source, or real suspicious information about more pressing issues that was created to harm and mislead people, it's always good to check if the information you're getting is trustworthy, especially on the internet. Even if you're not someone like me who enjoys documenting and contextualizing the obscure, it's always interesting to look deep into the media you enjoy and discovering aspects of it you never would have known otherwise. But then again, that could also just be me trying to justify making a whole video about something this inconsequential, but nevertheless, that was my investigation into this infamous Gorillaz rumor. And if you never did no harm, then consider liking this video. And if you feel like you were there yourself, then consider subscribing as well. And I'll see you all in the next video.